Good evening and welcome. Welcome everybody. It's nice to see you all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Diana Clark, and I'm most often here on Fridays. Wow. Today's only Monday. I'm here on Mondays, except when I'm off teaching retreats or something, then there's substitute teachers. And I want to start by talking about this simile, this analogy that gets used a lot in kind of like in the Buddhist tradition, a way to describe practice, as a way, also as a way to describe like this whole path of practice to liberation. And I want to like tease it apart and look at it and see if there's some things that we can learn and like how we can apply it to our own lives today, and way that we can understand and appreciate maybe some of the finer elements here when we sometimes don't think about or aren't so obvious when we talk about this simile in particular, or also about our practice. And I'll start with this notion of this idea of crossing the floods. This is an expression that shows up a number of times in the early Buddhist literature. And maybe it's not surprising, ancient India, right there in the Ganges plains, and there's this monsoon season, and things flood. And you have to wait till the end of the monsoon season to cross the flood. Nowadays, how many creeks do we cross? And we don't even know it, right? Because we're on a freeway or a highway or something. But then it was a big deal. That you'd be separated from whomever, whatever, for months at a time, simply because you couldn't cross over the water. And not only is it like separate you, but if you get caught in the flood, like, you get carried away to presumably someplace you didn't want to go. So this flood is something that's overwhelming. It's just like takes you over and you don't have a choice. So you get carried away to downstream, presumably. And maybe it's, even incredibly dangerous. So Ajahn Sucitto, he's a teacher in this tradition. He's a well-respected teacher, and he writes about this idea about crossing the floods. And he writes that it's often, sometimes people come to practice because they have this feeling of being overwhelmed and things are a little bit out of control and it's just too much and it's not going the direction I want. So maybe there's this feeling of being in the floods and they wish to be on one of the banks, no longer being subject to this big body of water that's flushing through. So this idea about crossing the flood is then going, from getting to where one wants, but recognize that it's not going to be so straightforward to get there. And then maybe I'll introduce then the simile that I'd like to spend some time unpacking today, and this is called the simile of the raft. It's very common. It shows up a number of times in the sutta teachings, and sometimes even like people say, well, the raft, as a shortcut. Kind of like, some people today's might say, well, the turtle and the hare. And that's all you have to say. They know the whole story. One's faster than the other and not the one that you think is going to be faster. In the same way, sometimes this idea of the raft. So here's the simile, and then I'd like to talk about it. So this is the Buddha speaking, and he says, imagine a person in the course of a journey arrives at a great expanse of water. Some translators use the word flood, whose near shore is dangerous and whose far shore offers safety. But there's no ferry boat or bridge to take them across the water. So the person thinks, what if I collect grass and twigs and branches and leaves and bound them together and create a raft? And then supported by the raft and by paddling with my hands and feet, I should then be able to reach the far shore, get across the flood. So then the person does this and succeeds in getting it across to the far shore. On arriving at the far shore, it might occur to them, wow, I added that. That's not in the suttas. This raft has been very helpful. What if I were to hoist it on my head or load it on my shoulders and proceed on my journey? So this idea like, okay, this raft was really helpful. I better carry it with me everywhere I go. And then the Buddha says, now what do you think? By carrying it with them, would that person be doing what should be done with a raft? And the people who are listening say, no, Venerable Sir. So then the Buddha asks, so what should the person do with the raft? And then the Buddha says, having arrived at the far shore, the person might think, yes, this raft has been very useful, but now I should just haul it onto dry land or release it and set it adrift in the water and then go wherever I want. In this way, the person would be doing what should be done with that raft. So there's a lot of little stories in here that we can tease apart about this. And so, first of all, this is some of these different elements. Is it starts with, imagine a person in the course of a journey arrives at a great expanse of water whose near shore is dangerous and whose far shore is safety. First is just to notice the near shore is dangerous. And this word dangerous we could use as a simile or to stand in for, it's not a refuge. It's not a place that can provide some lasting happiness or lasting safety or lasting ease. Instead, it's going to be difficult, and some of you might have even noticed this during this 30-minute sit. There's often this sense like, okay, I'm going to sit, I'm going to meditate, and then what happens? Right? I think all of our minds, like human minds, have this idea that maybe you notice that the mind starts to wander, and maybe it's thinking about things that you're planning that you need to take care of, or maybe there's a memory that arises, or maybe there's a fantasy about something that doesn't even exist yet, or you're rehearsing a conversation that'll happen in the future, and they're like, oh, right, I'm supposed to be meditating. This idea like, okay, come back to the meditation. For many people, it's having mindfulness of the sensations of breathing. But it doesn't take long with a meditation practice for us to be reminded or aware of, we don't control the mind. We don't, of course we don't. If we did, you wouldn't need a meditation practice. So there's this sense of like, we don't control where the mind goes. We can't only think happy thoughts. We can't only be like focused exactly when we want to be and be relaxed when we want to be. It doesn't work that way. And so that's part of like this near shore being dangerous, is that the mind, right, it can get us into all kinds of trouble. To be sure, it also can supply all kinds of beautiful, fantastic experiences, meaningful experiences, and can support us on our path. But we don't control it in the way that we think we might. And certainly with practice, there's a neuroplasticity, right? So the mind just starts to become more and more capable and used to and gets into the groove of settling down and meditating. But it doesn't mean that we can, when we're not meditating, for example, we're only thinking certain thoughts. Of course not. It doesn't happen. I will say with practice, though, the thoughts start to be less problematic. It stops to be less of an issue. But this idea that we don't control them is part of recognizing, okay, this this near shore isn't a permanent refuge. But it's not only that it's that might be this simple activities that we're doing that we don't maybe give a second thought to have a certain amount of dissatisfaction, a certain amount of stress or unease, or things just not being quite right, or just feeling downright bad. There's this another simile, I'll shove in a simile inside this other simile, that the Buddha gives about doing something that would have been an ordinary thing for people again in ancient India to do. And that is, right, if they needed light back then, of course, was associated with a flame, of course. And so the Buddha, he gives this simile. Suppose a person took a blazing grass torch and went against the wind. So it's one thing to be lighting your way, but what if the wind is coming this way? What do you think? If that person does not quickly let go of that blazing grass torch, wouldn't that blazing grass torch burn their hand or their arm or some other part of the body so that they might incur death or deadly suffering because of that? So this is just an ordinary thing, just having to pay attention. Like, okay, if you hold something that's on fire and that's windy, chances are you're going to get burned. So too, so that Buddha says, a practitioner considers sensual pleasures have been compared to a grass torch. They provide great disappointment and great trouble, while the danger in them is great. So he's saying this, some things that we might do might hook us, and we might just be always looking for these pleasures, this addiction to comfort, or this idea that we have to have, everything has to be pleasurable all the time. That's not helpful. Some examples of this might be that if you notice how you feel like after you've been like watching too many videos on the internet, there's this way that it's like this icky feeling afterwards. You feel drained and the brain is, at least this happens to me, for those times I've done this, I felt like, oh my gosh, it was awful. I have a headache and I feel like either what I was watching was makes me feel bad because what's happening there, or bad about myself because my life doesn't look like their life, right? Of course, this type of thing. So there's a way in which some of these things that we think that they're pleasurable actually turn out not to be pleasurable in the big picture. So the Buddha is pointing to just noticing some of the difficulties that are here on this shore. But then the simile continues, and it says, a person arrives at a great expanse of water whose near shore is dangerous, but and the far shore offers safety, but there's no ferry boat or bridge to take them across the water. Just this recognition, oh yeah, we want an easy way. We want to have to not even get out of our cars, just drive over, we don't get wet, we don't even notice. But that's not possible for what's being pointed to here. Of course we want river boats and ferries and bridges. And something that these things imply is that somebody else has done the work to create them. And that maybe we kind of secretly wishing somehow that somebody else will do the hard labor and we can just benefit from it. And in some way, I mean, the Buddha did do some hard labor, and we are benefiting from it. But he says very clearly that he shows the way, but we have to do the walking. And so this path of practice, we actually have to find our way. Like, we know where to go. We can see where we have to go on the other shore there. And we have to figure out, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get there? So in this simile, the person says, what if I collected grass, twigs, branches, and leaves and bound them together as a raft? I love this. This grass, twigs, branches, and leaves. That's just what's right here. Like this person, he's standing on the banks, and that's what's right there. He doesn't have to go searching for something specific. He doesn't have to, go contact a potter and have them make something, or, it's just nature. It's just right here what's happening. And that's true for us also. We don't have to wait for just the right moment, just the right conditions. We can work on finding our way to greater freedom and ease, peace, liberation, working with exactly what's happening right now, this moment. Feel uncomfortable, your mind is racing, feeling very happy, have a lot of ease. Whatever's happening, we can work with that and be part of our practice. There's a number of ways, and that would be a whole Dharma talk, like how we can do this here, but maybe one way is to not get tangled up in them, not get tangled up in these leaves. They should be bigger. If they were bigger, then it would be better for me. Or the grass should be longer. To recognize how we are always trying to make things be different. We have so much resistance to what's actually here. And instead to put down the resistance and just to work with what's here. And it's the putting down the resistance and paying attention to what's actually here is how the raft gets built. This is what carries us across, really. And so this simile, it continues. It says, supported by the raft and by paddling with my hands and feet, I should then be able to reach the far shore. So I like this idea, like supported by the raft and paddling with my hands and feet. So still having to do effort. Even though it made a raft, it doesn't mean that like it's just downhill from there on, or smooth sailing. But this idea of creating the conditions in which maybe we could do something that we couldn't do before. Now we can do some paddling where before all we could do was walking, or something like this. And so much of our practice is increasing our capacities to be with discomfort, our capacities to be present for ourselves, to honor and respect ourselves, to honor and respect others. And when these things start to happen, this honor and respect and capability of being uncomfortable, then things unfold in a different way. They unfold with greater ease. They unfold with more, I'm going to use this word ease, without us trying to manufacture and, no, I don't want this, and trying to make sure that it doesn't go that way or something, and we're blaming and criticizing and getting angry and upset, but instead, no, okay, I have grass, leaves, twigs, and branches. This is what I'm going to work with. I'm going to work with them and create a raft that's then going to help me move to the other side. And then, I still have to paddle when I get there. And I love this idea of kind of like paddling with hands and feet. Yeah, with what you have. Maybe everybody doesn't have use of all their hands or both of their feet, but you work with what you have. I think that's what's being pointed to here. So there's this we're having to notice that the other bank is not dangerous, like this wish to want to go there in the first place. And this requires that we have a sense of, less difficulties, less suffering, less stress, less dissatisfaction is possible. We have to have that sense it is possible. Otherwise, why would we bother? And chances are, all of us know this because we touch into it sometimes. Maybe as part of meditation practice, maybe there's just times in our life when we have a certain ease, hiking with the redwood trees, sitting at the beach, waking up from a fantastic nap where you feel really refreshed, having loved ones nearby, grandkids, kids, siblings, parents, whatever it might be, whomever it might be. There might be this time that we recognize, oh yeah, it is possible to have some more ease and some spaciousness, and to be willing to do this. Part of the problem is humans have a negativity bias, and we tend to, like when there's a pleasant experience, some openness and spaciousness. And I'm defining pleasant in this way of like, ease, not necessarily having nonstop chocolate ice cream, for example, or something like this, but more just having it's like some radical contentment, like, yeah, it's okay. And often we tend to dismiss these moments because we're looking for the big bang, wahoo, roller coaster type of experiences, thinking that's really what happiness is, fireworks and celebrations and cake and ice cream, these types of things. Those are great too, but the truth is, most of our lives we do have moments where it's okay. Maybe we finished doing the dishes and the kitchen's all clean and it looks very nice, and maybe that's just a moment. It feels good, like, oh, okay. So this recognition that it is possible, and that's possible for you, for me, for all of us, and that there's a way that we can find our way where that's more and more of our experience. Instead of something that, some person did thousands of years ago and, oh, isn't that cute? Instead, like, oh no, this is something for all of us. And so this far shore, it can, sometimes we think of it, or sometimes Dharma teachers will talk about it as nibbana, but it can just simply be a refuge, a place where we feel like we can rest. This kind of a sense of where we can relax. It is possible to not have so much dukkha, of course it is. And so, maybe returning back to this idea of effort, there's this two types of effort. One is like cultivating the raft, making the raft, developing. And the other is employing the raft, using the raft. And we might think about that, these different ways of doing that practice asks of us, this cultivation, as well as things like reflection or meditation or ethical behavior, things that we're doing in our daily lives. So there's this, then when the person on this simile, when it goes back, when he gets to the far shore, the Buddha asks this inquiry, whether to carry the raft or to leave it behind. Like, I'm getting my notes, my page numbers a little mixed up here, but this idea that once you get to the far shore, so this question is, well, this raft was so handy, should I carry it on my head or put it on my shoulders? And I think the important thing here is this little simile, or this little note that's in the simile, is, well, to either bring it on dry land. Maybe you know that there might be some rivers or creeks or floods to cross, and maybe you don't need it that moment, or maybe you can come back for it later. Or maybe you send it down the flood because it's just leaves and creek twigs and branches anyway, so just let it go. But at the end of this simile, he says, just let it go and then go wherever I want. So the freedom that's available if we are able to let go of even things that at one time were helpful, doesn't mean that it will always be helpful. And to recognize, okay, what is helpful and when is the time to use these things and when is it not the time? And this week I'm teaching the 7 a.m.s. I'm substitute teaching for Gil, and I'm doing a theme on the inner critic. And there's something about the inner critic is, the inner critic, maybe there was a time in which it was helpful to kind of give ourselves a little pep talk like, no, you didn't do that right, you can do this, or maybe we internalize something that we heard when we were young. But the inner critic is often, not always, but is often something that we drag with us into our adult life from when we were really young. And so in this way, some of the things that we learned, some of the messages that we heard, or maybe at one point were helpful. And maybe this inner critic is just trying to protect us from what it perceives something that will be really terrible. But we can think of it as, okay, maybe it's time to put that down in the same way that we would put this raft down and no longer be something that we would carry with us. So this simile of the raft, this idea of being on the near shore, flood of water, wanting to get to the far shore because there's safety there, then building a raft with whatever one finds, using that raft and putting forth some effort to get to the far shore, and then when there, putting the raft down. So we might summarize this as in a way of practice. I mean, the way the simile goes, the story goes, it's linear, but we might summarize it in a way that's not necessarily linear, but as noticing, doing, releasing. So kind of 3 different aspects of practice towards greater freedom. Noticing, just noticing and being present for our life. So often we're disconnected and distracted, and maybe we're disconnected from ourselves, disconnected from others, but kind of like just noticing what's happening and noticing what's helpful and what's not helpful, what brings more ease and what doesn't bring more ease. Noticing, is there a way that we're showing up in the world that's causing harm for ourselves or for others? Just being sensitive to this, tuning into this. And then doing. Sometimes in the Buddhist teachers we talk about, don't do, and sometimes we talk about do. So it's a little bit of both, right? But this idea of like cultivating, that's why we have a meditation practice, is to kind of like cultivate wholesome, helpful mental states so that they can support us in our life. And they can help us abandon these things that are not so helpful. The inner critic would be an example like this. So just abandon. This turns out not to be helpful. Instead, it tends to discourage us and deflate us and demoralize us in a way that gets in the way of our showing up the best way we can, or for us to have the best life we can. So this carrying is, the doing. Maybe the raft, maybe we do something and maybe part of it is bringing the raft on shore and thinking like, okay, I learned how to build this and it's going to be useful. I don't need it right now, but maybe it will be useful later. And then releasing. The raft is left behind at that moment here in this simile. This practice is not about getting and attaining and having more and more and more. It turns out the way forward is releasing, opening. And that just means that sometimes that in order to let go, to release, there has to be some cultivation. There's things. It's so much easier to let go or soften if there's a certain amount of well-being. We all know this, that when we're happier, it's easier to like, oh, okay, that's not a problem that, lost that. I don't know where my sunglasses are. It's not a good thing. Nobody likes to lose things, but if losing one's sunglasses happens on top of so many terrible things that happened that day and already a bad mood, right? That's very different than like, okay, woke up from the nice nap and you want to go for a hike and like, okay, I don't have my sunglasses. I guess I'll just wear a hat, something like this. So part of the cultivating, this doing part, is to have a sense of well-being, have a sense of like nourishing our inner life. There's a way in which so often, there's a way in which we are so hungry or feel like we're starving and just not enough inside. And so part of this practice, that doing, is for the nourishing. Makes it easier and easier to release. And I could say part of the nourishing is releasing some of the things that maybe we are taking in that aren't nourishing. But we're spending our time filling our minds and our lives with these things that aren't supportive. Maybe that's part of the releasing too, is, okay, this isn't helpful. This is, I thought it was helpful when I started, but it's no longer is, or something like this. So noticing, doing, and releasing as maybe 3 different aspects of practice that they are all intertwined, and sometimes it's helpful to tease apart these different elements, and sometimes it's not so helpful. But this idea of, to help us get across these floods, these things that overwhelm us, and they feel like, it's just too much. We feel like we're getting maybe submerged in whatever life is bringing us. Simile of the raft as noticing, doing, and releasing. Not necessarily in that order. And now I think I'd like to open it up to see if there's some questions or comments. This idea of paddling with one's feet, hands and feet. Do you guys have an idea, like what would be a modern day, what would, if, like, how could we interpret that if we're not going across the raft, if we're not using the raft across the flood?
Diana,
Yes?
something that came up for me as you were talking about the raft was I had a relationship to it with trust or confidence, that it keeps you buoyed above, not sinking into the water, that there's some element of support associated with that.
Fantastic, fantastic. Do you know that Tonya and Gil and I have, we teach this teaching, it's called Raft practice, R-A-F-T, and sometimes the T is trust. The same idea that this confidence that it can keep you afloat in some kind of way. But did you want to say more about that, Jim?
No.
No, I like this. I like this, how partly, building the raft, kind of cultivating things, does give us confidence. Certainly, like okay, I can handle this. In the past, I wouldn't have been able to, or maybe the confidence that we can, maybe if we don't handle it perfectly, but that we can recover, like, oh, okay, I don't have to beat myself up so badly as I had in the past, or something like this. Thank you, Jim. Did I say a question over here? Did you have one question? Can you, with the microphone over there? Thank you, Scott.
So this raft building, I was thinking about it in terms of my own life. And one of the issues is that the near shore of this water is dangerous, but I have no idea what the other shore is. So in the simile, it said it was safe, but maybe somehow the raft builder knew that it was safe, but I never know. I keep on building rafts, but I don't know whether the other shore is safe. Is that an issue that the Buddha addressed, that we really don't know?
No, in this, he is saying, it's a simile to talk about like getting to safety, but your point is a valid one. Like, okay, we don't absolutely know what's on the other side of the flood, but sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes life brings us, okay, where we were standing just doesn't exist anymore for, whatever reason. Our things in our life change, and, that just the near shore changes, and we have to go forward in some kind of way, whether we know it's safe or not, right? Yeah. I think we would all like to have some reassurance, but it's not always there, of course. Yeah, thank you. And then I think over here, right? Did you have a?
I came here today. I haven't been here in a couple of years, and I just found that I had some.
Can you hold the microphone just a little bit closer?
I
Thank
had
you.
some empty time in my life for the first evening in about a couple of months, and it felt empty. It just felt empty, and I felt right about coming here. But while I was meditating, of course, I was rerunning scenarios with my family, and so not knowing what basically trying to fix it. How am I going to fix it? And so I started thinking about the raft and paddling. Like sometimes paddling for me is just making a phone call to somebody to say what's on my mind so I can get feedback, because I'm not always thinking correctly. And but then there are other times when I keep gathering grass and sticks and whatever. You can pile a lot of stuff on. You can go to therapy, then you can go on the internet. There's a million people telling you what you should do.
At least a million.
At least a million, right. And more vitamins, more this, and the idea of releasing today was so helpful for me, of realizing that, if you go to therapy, you don't have to go for the rest of your life, or if you have a relationship, it doesn't have to be the rest of your life. You don't have to behave the same way all the time.
That's right.
And trying to approach my daughter in a different way it's a little scary,
Yeah.
because both of us are going to have different reactions. But I'm having trust that it's going to be okay either way.
Nice.
Either way. Thank you very
Nice.
much.
You're welcome. And you also don't have reassurance. I mean, you don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you're going to.
I don't really need it, if I really am releasing, I don't really need it.
That's right. Thank you. Anybody else have comments? I guess back there.
Thank you. I really got a lot out of that talk. For me, the noticing that I'm in a spot that maybe isn't the healthiest is kind of the easy part, relatively speaking, for me. The doing, like what to do, is where I find it difficulty. And, looking at it with the, you're at the shore and there's water and you got to get across. Okay, I know what to do. But in my situation, a lot of times I don't know what to do. And wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I can say something general, of course, right? I guess that's the one thing I can say here. I'll start with something that's obvious. Well, if you will never regret, and it will always support you if you follow the 5 precepts. So behave in an ethical way. So this is something that will always be a support for you. Doesn't mean it will always be the easiest, it doesn't mean it will always be comfortable, but that's sometimes when our life is really in disarray and we don't know what to do, like sometimes that's, I've heard a Dharma teacher give this advice to somebody else who was really have her in a tumultuous period of her life, and the advice was hold on to the precepts as if they are a raft that are carrying you across. So that's one thing I can offer, is you'll never have a regret with that. And then, the Eightfold Path, if you're familiar with that, that can really help too. This idea of like, right effort is paying attention, like, okay, what's helpful, what's not helpful, and just noticing that. Sometimes just saying, okay, I'm going to notice when I do this, is it helpful or is it not? And really, like, intentionally investigate that, I guess, maybe. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Anybody else have something they'd like to say or comment? Okay, so wishing you a lovely rest of the evening, and may your rafts float beautifully. Thank you.